Welcome to our final panel discussion for this conference. This panel discussion I favorably call the session of the explorers. All right, so this is the session where we have Deidre presenting on the Arakan language, the Lokono, Dr. Rob with Berbice Dutch Creole, Ardeen giving us some Maroon languages, and we also have Charlene and Tamiran with their exploits into Guyanese studies, our Guyanese Creole studies. So our first presenter, Deidre Telfer, is a lecturer at the University of Technology and a graduate study in the in the Department of Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy under the tutelage of Professor Hubert Devonish. She has interest in language documentation and revitalization. Her presentation today will discuss a project that was a ICCLR and University of Guyana collaborative project where they looked at the revitalizing of the Lokono Arawakan language. So give a round of applause to Deidre, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Kedisha. Good afternoon, everyone. I deliberately did not comment on Clive's question earlier on language revitalization because I think some of what he was questioning will come out in the presentation that I'm about to make. All right. So the title is "Wana Dead No Dashwe," and it's really my report on, as Kedisha mentioned, collaborative work that has been done, of course, with Professor Devonish's Ed Kukam Bakawasha, all right, between the ICCLR, who pulled me into the project, having worked on Lokono before, and the then Guyanese Languages Working Group, that is now the Guyanese Languages Unit, right, headed by Charlene Wilkinson here. So I'm going to take you through what we did. Well, first of all, how it all came about and why it came about and what we did for the project. Before going into that, though, just a little basic background on the language. Lokono used to refer to the language by scholars, Lokojang by the speakers of the community, and Arawak by outsiders, basically. I mean, speakers use the language, but those who are really connected to it do not like it referred to as Arawak. They will continue to correct you and say Lokojang, right, which is the language of the Lokono people. It is a member of the Arawakan language group, and it is spoken in different places. Guyana is just one of them. There's Suriname, there is also French Guyana. Now, basically, the community that we started the project in is referred to as Wakapo Wakukwa by the speakers, and it's located in the Pomeroon area of Guyana, Region 2, and I tried a little map thing there where you see the yellow circle. The community is located more remotely than the other Lokono communities that you see highlighted on the map. It's made up of 25 islands, and what this means is that the members of the community are widely dispersed, right? And the estimated number of citizens, 3,000. It's inaccessible by road, which means that you have to get on a boat to get there. And of the 3,000 people, probably less than 100 actually fluently speak the language. I do not actually have data to back it up, but based on interactions with members of the community, that is what it suggests. So, what is the language status of Lokono? It's referred to as moribund, meaning that it is in extreme endangerment, and dying. So what the speakers of the language have generally stopped using the Lokono language and started using largely Creolese, and for those who have been through the education system, some amount of English as well. The typical speaker in the community is what we call the grandparent generation, 70 years and older, generally a farmer in the community, hardly or never leaves the community, and we can understand why we have that maintenance of the language among that group, and they're relatively isolated in comparison to other persons within the community. Now, why did this whole language revitalization start? I saw this quote earlier, and I felt the need to just read it here. It says, a language that is not a language of government, nor a language of education, nor a language of commerce or of wider communication is a language whose very existence is threatened in the modern world. And in light of what the conference is about and has been resonated throughout the entire session, then I think that this sums up some of a bit of what we have discussed. And it's basically explaining the position that Lokono is in. It's not a language of government. It's not a language of education. It's not a language of commerce, right? It's only used among very few persons in the community. And for that reason, it is now threatened and approaching death. So the language revitalization effort is really an attempt to strengthen the language by bringing the language to a new generation of language learners, and in doing so, will halt and reverse the extinction of the Lokono language. So that is what language revitalization is, regardless of the context. So we have a very large task ahead of us where this is concerned, but every miko make a moko, so we started. How did it start? The then to show, because there is change in government, of Wakapo reached out to Charlene Wilkinson at a Tushol conference seeking assistance with language revitalization. I think that was triggered by a bit of funding that the community got from the Guyanese government to start a project. Their idea of a language revitalization project essentially was holding a few classes in the evenings with just about anybody who turns up. And the sessions were supposed to be facilitated by Priest Jones, an elder in the community who is highly respected, knows the language, but of course is not using any specific strategy for these classes. So young, old, in between are invited to the sessions, and so they wanted assistance from Charlene. Charlene then reached out to, Hubert Devonish. I'm changing your name, Prof. The then head of JLU and the head of the International Center for Caribbean Language Research, and he then pulled me in, and in pulling me in, I was able to visit the community earlier this year and start preliminary activities. He also has reached out to Anita Barrett from Belize, who is a speaker of Garifuna, a close relative of Lokono, and a language and education specialist, because one of the things coming out of the trip, which you'll see, is the need to introduce the language in the school system in order for it to be as effective as possible. So the purpose of the project really is to initiate language revitalization activities in the community, and the ultimate objective is to produce a generation of children who have Lokono as at least one of their first languages. Well, native languages. Let's not use first as we learned yesterday. The plan for the beginning of the project was split in two. We started out with a fact-finding mission in October 2017, done by Charlene, Tamirand, and others from Guyana, to initiate interactions with the community and to do a little language attitude survey, which I'll show you some of the results of later on. The second trip was done in January 2018, and it was a collaboration. I went in, I met up with the group from Guyana, which included some students from the University of Guyana as well. And the aim was to conduct a language needs or a language, do a language assessment survey to see what kinds of resources do we have, what would be the needs of the community, what would be the best approaches to take in actually getting a revitalization project started. And we didn't just want to go finding more information, we wanted to actually start something. And we went in with a plan of a few activities. One of those is to introduce a writing system for the language. So we had workshops surrounding that, as well as to interact with members of the community regarding other approaches. How possible would it have been to have, for example, a family programming type of setting where we have persons of different generations in the same household, and who the oldest person would know the language and be able to impart it to others. How possible would it be to have a master apprentice kind of setting where, even though there might not be families, somebody close by who knows the language could facilitate somebody else who is willing to learn the language. So we had quite an ambitious plan going in January. I can't describe it any other way, but we wanted to go and see what was possible. And then, as any field linguist knows, what you go in with as a plan and what actually happens are two completely different things, which we also experienced in this trip as well. So the first thing I'm going to look at, the results of the little survey that we did about the language attitudes, and then talk to you about a few of the activities that we looked at based on what the community seems to need, as well as what best practices suggest for effective language revitalization. All right? So, starting with the first, one of the questions we asked was about their desire to learn or improve their knowledge of Lokono, because we do have partially competent persons who wouldn't mind improving their language. So we asked whether or not they would like to do so, and 61% of the respondents suggested that they would like to learn or improve on their knowledge of the language, and those were the ones who strongly agreed. The ones that said 23%, yes, they would like to learn, but it's not as, what would I say now? Right, so the desire is not as strong as the others who responded in 61%. All right, it does not matter if Lokono dies. We thought that this was a good question to ask to see how they felt about the language. And 40% strongly disagree that it does not matter, which is good, right? The 49 strongly disagree. So when you put those two together, we get what? 80, 89, sorry, my math is not very good. 89% who really believes that the language should continue to be alive, right? So they disagree that it doesn't matter if the language dies. When asked about the most effective means of encouraging Lokono learning and use, 57% thought that formal classes would have been something to implement. 24% thought that the home was a good place to start, and 19% thought that the fluent elders needed to come together and teach the language, basically, because they are the language resource. Now, the results of the trip. One of the things that we knew we needed to do is sensitization about the project as well as build rapport, right? Because we're going into the people's community talking about language revitalization. And what we found is that even though we were invited in by the Tusho, many people did not know about the project or had misconceptions about what the project aimed to achieve. So much of what we had to be doing during the trip was to sensitize. In fact, there are two distinct instances where I spent a great deal trying to calm people down because they felt slighted. They felt that people were being handpicked for the project by the current administration. And because of that, we got it, right? So Brother Lloyd, for example, when we approached him, we were informed by the Tushaw that he's a good person to speak with about imparting knowledge about the arts and craft of the community. And when we approached him, we thought that he had the heads up that we were coming. He didn't. And the first thing that he said is that if you want information, you have to pay, right? And because basically one of the main ideas that they have is that this is yet another group coming to take from us. And I had to spend some time explaining that we were actually invited in to assist the community in trying to save the language, because as they know, and then after explaining and telling him that, well, I was here years ago and I did interviews with a number of persons, etc. He warmed up and he started. So if people understood what the purpose was before we got in, then I think that the trip would have been much more successful, all right? So another thing that we did was the writing system workshop. We went with the intention to hold one workshop. We were asked to do 2 in one day. Unfortunately, because of the rain, we had to do it in 2 days, but we still did 2 workshops because the community requested 2 workshops. And these images actually show pictures from the very first workshop where the students and everybody from the Guyanese group was there, right? We went with flip charts. We didn't plan for the wind. And so we had to improvise. So we have, even Tamiran's son was holding up papers just so that I could take them through the system. It was fun, right? But it was very productive. People came out in numbers, especially for this first workshop. And after the workshop, we had a little competition where we gave little gifts. Who could do write some words using the system that they have been introduced to, and they participated. Well, for this workshop, the winner got 2 out of 12, but it was an indication that they were willing to be a part of this project. And I got volunteers then and there to be members of a community group that would take part in the revitalization. This is the second day, and it's much smaller group. As you can see, people are standing because we did not have anywhere to sit. It was the, what you call it there? Their little stadium, basically, on the field. And so we had to lay we put down the charts on the ground for holding purposes, and we took up each sheet when it was time to take them through the different parts of the system. They came, they stood, they participate. The lady, what side is this? On the right, bottom was the winner in that competition, right? And we were very happy. It was 3 out of 12. She got higher than the previous person, right? And we felt very proud about that, right? All in all, we felt good about the writing system workshop. One of the main aims was to get feedback on some of the touchy areas that might be different in different varieties, for example. One of let me see if I can give you an example. A word that has chi, you say saban chi, right? Underlyingly, the form is saban ti. However, they have never said saban ti. And the previous persons, for example, I don't remember his name right now, has been promoting a writing system across all versions of Arawak that uses the underlying form. But nobody there uses that form. And when asked about it, they say, well, we'd prefer to use what we say, basically, because they would not be able to relate to that. Plus, it would take quite a bit of explaining. So that was one of the purposes of the introducing that at that time. Family programming was one of the other areas that we looked at, where we encouraged persons to start using the language more in their homes. For example, I was telling Mr. Cabral here that set aside an hour or so, where that is all you talk to the children, so that a little a day they get introduced to more of the language as they go along. And then to identify cultural events or practices that we could target, for example, in preparing lessons, etc., and as a part of documentation. We got a little brighter out of the trip. We were able to not only be in Wakapo, but we met with the Tushaw of the Lake Mainstay community, who was very interested and would want to be a part of the trip. We met with the village council in the Akawini community, who wanted to be a part of the trip. And through Tamirand and her students, we had interactions with members from Kapui and Mashabo, who also expressed interest. So we kind of want to see how best we can make it a kind of Essequiban revitalization project going forward. I'm going to skip through because I'm out of time. Just some of the challenges. The strong dependence on the team, the common misconception we mentioned earlier. No money is a big challenge, right? So one of the aims is to seek funding. Digicel, for example, has one of their highest towers in the Wakapo community. So we're looking how we can target them as well, all right? And that looks like it, okay? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deidre. Very informative. Because of the time constraints, we'll allow for 2 questions.
So I like your approach of interacting with the members of the community and asking them, what is it that you want from your own language? And, here is what we can do, and here are some suggestions. What has been the ongoing, activity since you've left, right? So now that you are no longer there, kind of pushing things, did it slow down? So that's my question. And the comment was, be wary of the involvement of corporatization in things like this.
Yeah.
Places like Digicel, and because I'm wondering, suppose it was a place like an alcoholic beverage or something like that that was nearby. I mean, would you involve them too? So be wary of the kind of corporate involvement that you want to carry into the community, because it could rob certain things from this community. So that's...
Okay, well, to answer your question, yes, things did slow down, and it's one of the things that I had as under the topic challenge, that the dependence on us as external persons to keep things going. However, Skeeter Thomas has been, who is a member of the community, and a young member of the community, has been central in the whole project so far. I know that the lessons that were originally planned to be held by the priest, those were actually done. And in speaking to Skeeter recently, they have formed a committee for the language revitalization, and they have been meeting to see where they can start to do certain things. What I can't report on is whether the families that I spoke to then are actually using more of the language, all right? But that's one of the things that the committee is set up to achieve, to kind of help in the monitoring process and to keep in touch. But one of the things that is also needed are resources, materials that have to be developed, which is kind of where I come in mostly. For example, the priest is using an alphabet chart. When I spoke with him about it, I was impressed to see that he had his alphabet chart up. When I spoke to him about it, he said somebody asked him to do it years ago, but he has not yet completed because he cannot find a word that begins with Q and X or something like that. Yes, and I said to him, that's because you're trying to reproduce what is in English, right? As opposed to representing the sounds that exist in your language. So you're trying to find specific words that could, and you're not listening to what the sounds are, you're not being guided by what the sounds are. So you have a perfect chart that can be used to teach the language. Well, not perfect, because I was discussing some other areas with him. But that's one of the things that I need to work on to get to them so that they can also be resourced. Yes, Prof.
First of all, clearly a plug for the field trips. You see how you're talking confident to me, I'm a big expert, right? Okay? Yeah, but it's true, because I couldn't help listening to you and saying, but I remember when you were just going in there, like,
yes.
I know you. That was good. Right? In other words,
to be honest, I was kind of in my element in the field. I was like, I really enjoyed it.
Good. And the other thing, just to say, of course, that I just add in, since you called my name, that the thing with the concept being that you picked up that they wanted formal education, all of them in the Essequibo course, and there were school teachers, basic school and primary school teachers that we figure maybe can be targeted to bring in the elders, even if they themselves don't know the language, and basically initiate some kind of mother tongue education, given that the Ghana government has already moved basically to approve some element of mother tongue education, and I think UNICEF is also oriented in that direction. So the idea was really to bring in now an education expert who would do a bit of a feasibility study with a view eventually to doing a second visit to train the teachers, right? So that's where we are. And in terms of the funding, the ICCLR funding is what's been used so far to finance this, rather than Mr. Digicel.
Right. Yes, and at least 3 teachers expressed interest to be a part of the project. Yes, Prof. Yes, Prof.
Deidre, one of the advantages of that location, of course, is that Wakapau is central to the development of to the retention of the Arawak language in that whole area of Guyana. And if you go to Kapui, if you go to Mainstay, if you go to
everybody is
Moshabo,
connected to Wakapau.
Everybody is linked into Wakapau. My question is, how are we going to use those links to advance us through the next stage?
Well, the Priest Jones that I mentioned earlier was, well, the mainstay community actually got funding before Wakapo or at the same time for language revitalization. So the priest was split, basically. So resources from Wakapo, resource persons from Wakapo are the ones who have been assisting in Mainstay and Kapui. Right now it's just restricted to one person. But if it's going to be an whatever the word is, project, then Wakapo will have to be central. It would mean, though, if it's about getting access to native speakers, then traveling will have to take place, right? And that is something that already is a challenge and something that would have to be worked out, the traveling, because the native speaker competence is needed for us to achieve what we want to achieve. And therefore, a part of what we will have to sit and map out is how best to share what Wakapo has, because the reality is the other communities do not have speakers. Juanita Fernandez in Mainstay is the only partial speakers, and I say partial speakers, even though she knows much of the language, because she'll tell a lad, I don't remember that, right? And she'll tell you, and why you wow with the language? So she also has that kind of attitude, and we would have to butter her up a little to get her to participate. But Wakapo would have to be a central part of it. How? Not sure just yet.
All right. So thank you, Deidre. Can she have a round of applause? All right, our next presenter, Audine Henry Harvey. So Audine is a lecturer at the University of Technology, Western Campus, where she is the faculty coordinator in the Faculty of Education and Liberal Studies. She's also another graduate student of Professor Devonish and has research interests in areas such as linguistic anthropology, languages in education, language use in Jamaican music, and the general field of sociolinguistics. Let us welcome Audie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Linguistic Fieldwork in a Ritual Context, a Model. And it's really my thoughts on how it is that linguistic fieldwork is conducted in situations where ritual languages exist, specifically related to the languages of the Maroons of Moortown, Jamaica, and that is located in Portland. So there are two primary strands of linguistic fieldwork, or two primary approaches to linguistic fieldwork that are taken. One is that linguistic fieldwork can be descriptive. So typically, and that is like what Deidre does. So typically linguistic fieldwork is done by descriptive linguists who record, transcribe, and analyze a previously undescribed or underdescribed language. It is carried out through observation of people using their language in natural daily interactions, and the result is usually a part or full description of the grammar of the language being studied. So it involves documentation. The aim is usually for preservation of that language if it is under threat. The focus is on looking at systems like syntax, phonology, and morphology. And in general, it is used to broaden knowledge of the languages and the linguistic systems in which, within which they fall, and typically rely on various strategies of direct elicitation of data. Another approach is anthropological type of linguistic fieldwork. So the focus on using fieldwork, what it is the focus on using fieldwork to drive an understanding of the way in which languages a mode of social interaction which provides the material out of which a group of people recognize themselves as a community. And so persons who do linguistic anthropology are a kind of minority group within the whole linguistic fieldwork landscape. Most linguistic fieldwork is descriptive in nature. So anthropological or linguistic anthropology, because anthropological linguistics is slightly different, is a means of gaining ethnographic knowledge. The focus is on how language reveals socio-cultural identities, the shared ideologies and worldview of the people that use them, and it focuses on the importance of also of documentation of endangered languages. This runs across both of the approaches. So there has been a lot of linguistic fieldwork that has come out of the university. So as you saw in the earlier presentation, Professor Robertson is perhaps the resident fieldwork expert, I think, in linguistics within the UWI. And he has been responsible for organizing pretty much all of the fieldwork expeditions that, as students, that we have gone on in Guyana, Suriname. Help me out. Where else? What? Curacao, Aruba, right? So, and one of Professor Devenish's catchphrases when we were undergraduate into graduate students, well, at the undergraduate level, was that we should do linguistics and see the world. Do you remember that? Right. So it started with Professor Devenish. I know other persons that have done research using fieldwork are Joan Ferreira on Portuguese in Trinidad, Karen Cumberbatch, who did work on country sign language in Jamaica, Nicole Scott, who did work on Trinidad French Creole, and of course Deidre, who you just heard from, who continues to do work on Lokono. And all of these persons still work in these areas. So, so in terms of focus on ritual languages in the Caribbean, there isn't a whole lot in terms of linguistics. I think Maureen Warner Lewis's focus on Trinidad Yoruba is perhaps the best example. However, Richard Price's work on Saramaccan and Kenneth Bilby's work on Jamaica, on the Maroons of Jamaica, which are anthropological work, are extremely important even for linguists because it involves a significant focus on the language of these groups and how those contribute to an understanding of their culture. So let me just tell you a little bit about how I got introduced to the Moortown Maroons in Portland. My first visit was as an undergraduate student doing Creole linguistics. And then subsequent to that, I lived in the community while I conducted fieldwork as a graduate student. And I have been involved in many subsequent trips to the community. I have developed a relationship, and I should say we have, because really it is not just me, it is Professor Devenish and I. I think we're kind of a package deal in that community. So we've developed a relationship with the community that goes way, at this point, it's way beyond just conducting research. So the language situation of the Moortown Maroons. It's a Jamaican Creole speaking community. That's the first thing to note. And some persons, mostly older members of the community, speak Cromanti and what I call Old Maroon Creole, and you might have heard referred to as Maroon Spirit Language by Kenneth Bilby. I make the distinction between I do not refer to it as Maroon Spirit language, primarily because it was not originally a spirit language. It was originally just a Creole language that later became used in spiritual contexts. So in referring to it as Old Maroon Creole, I'm just referring to it in the way that it was used and the way that the speakers of it refer to it. In fact, they don't even call it Old Maroon Creole. They just call it like how the old people used to talk. So they don't actually have an official name for the language. So these two languages, however, are recognized by Maroons as their ancestral languages. They're used now in very limited contexts, primarily in rituals practiced by the community. And the primary rituals are chromantic play, and chromantic play doesn't really happen in the community anymore, or I shouldn't say it doesn't happen. It is possible that it does happen, but it's so secret, it's so secretly done that if it were taking place, nobody would talk about it. And despite the level of comfort that we have with the community, that still is something that would remain hidden. And I'll give you a little story to explain why. So, chromantic play is a traditional Maroon ceremony in which a combination of the important practices of singing, dancing, and drumming, led by a feteman, and a feteman is a ritual specialist in the practice, are utilized to aid in the invocation of and consultation with dead ancestors so that the ancestors might aid them in solving some kind of problem that is brought before them. Usually it's a problem of a spiritual nature. A salo is a ritual healing of an individual that is done privately, especially if it has been determined that the illness is not severe enough to warrant a chromantic play. So in the modern situation, most Maroons would have that kind of practice, a salo. Or it could be that they would just do what Maroons call rub trash. Rub trash in itself is not a ritual, it's just an expression that is used to explain what is done, but it falls in the realm of ritual because it involves the use of Maroon herbs for medicinal and spiritual reasons, and anything that involves the use of herbs is ritual because you don't just use a herb, you have to consult with the spirits in order to use that herb. And because of that, it has to fall within that realm. And then there are other performances carried out in the community that are ritualistic. So Nanny Day celebrations, for example, in those instances, the groups, cultural groups, would perform Maroon songs and dances and sometimes reenactments. There are also sometimes a bang blowing at Christmas, and that's very ritualistic. And then when there's a death, of course, the wakes usually have, depending on who the person is and their level of importance in the community, in participation in various rituals, there would be drumming and spirit catching. And catching spirit is when a Maroon becomes, possessed by an ancestral spirit. Outside of that, though, there is a fairly large corpus, and I should say outside of those primary ritual contexts in which Chromanti and Old Maroon Creole are used, there is a fairly large body of just words, large corpus, both for Chromanti and to a lesser extent for Old Maroon Creole, and these are known to varying degrees by different members of the community. And so to emphasize their Maroonness, or they would insert them into conversations, whether among themselves or if they're talking to outsiders. So So some of the challenges faced in doing linguistic fieldwork in this kind of setting, and I've highlighted 4 of them. And the major one relates to the issue of secrecy. So there's a general belief that has been presented in literature that talks about the language, the Maroons, supported by Maroons themselves, believed also by non-Maroons, that Maroons are a very secretive people, that they don't share anything with you about their language and about their culture, because it has to be protected and preserved. However, in terms of linguistic, we do know some information about the languages that have been recorded. Dalby, Hall Alain have made some inroads in doing short studies on Cromanti. And even Kenneth Bilby did some linguistic work on Old Maroon Creole. And then historically and anthropologically, there's much more that has been done, and I'm just including ones that talk about Maroons in the kind of more, 20th century, which would include Kopitoff, Agorsa, well, not Carey so much, Zips, and a lot of work that has been done by Kenneth Bilby, including his very seminal, I think, maybe not seminal, but very good book published in 2015 called True-Born Maroons. So is the idea of secrecy in this community a myth, or is it that there is just a need to understand the complex dynamics that result in secrecy or relative openness with researchers? So I think that is one major challenge, this issue of secrecy and how researchers have to deal with it. So, so I've found within the Moortown community that what determines the level of secrecy is really very personal and specific to specific members of the community. There is no code of secrecy that exists within the community. And this is something that I didn't know at the beginning, but knowledge that I gained over time. So the spoken Maroon belief is that Maroons have to carefully guard their knowledge and culture depending on who they're communicating with. And this really covers everybody, whether it is Maroon communicating with a nigger, which is the term that applies to all black non-Maroons, or Maroons communicating with a bongo man. And a bongo man is like African like a Maroon, but from a different area of Africa, not as witty, not as knowledgeable, and not and doesn't have a distinct language in the way that Maroon does. It typically applies to the Kikongo, the descendants of the Kikongo group who live in St. Thomas. And I think they have a distinct name for them because there has historically been a close, kind of link between Maroons in Portland and those in St. Thomas. There's also a difference in how Maroons relate to White Amigo, who are half Maroons, and how they relate to Maroons themselves. All of these groups are treated in different ways, or in the same way pretty much in terms of how secretive Maroons are. So, I'm sorry, I don't know, it changed. So I'll give you one situation. One of my informants, and we're calling the informant LP, with whom Kenneth Bilby lived while he did research in Moortown between 1979 and 1980, was most stern when she discussed with me what Maroons should and should not do. So what she said is that the Maroon should never marry to an outsider because we have our secret, and that is what breaks down our business, because it should never happen. Our old people leave that on record, that Maroon people should not marry to stranger. So in addition to that, she explained that she had 5 children, and of the 5, she had only passed on what she knew about the Maroon language and culture to one of those children, because only one of them showed a propensity for, being able to handle that knowledge. And then she also told me that while Kenneth Bilby lived with her, she shared not one single word of anything having to do with the language and the culture with him. However, she freely shared lots of things with me, and I don't know why she did that. Her only explanation was that she liked me. She liked me, and so she told me what she wanted to. So I got lots of information, lots of songs, rich songs that were very important in the data that I collected. Stories, language fragments of Cromanti and Old Maroon Creole, and that was her only explanation. And then another informant who I can name, Isaac Bernard, who was one of my primary informants, simply shared information with me because he thought I was a white Amigel, I was a half Maroon. I know I'm not a half Maroon, but that seems to have been what he needed me to be in order to tell me what he wanted to tell me. So, so another issue, and I'm sorry, this is the wrong presentation. Another issue relates to issues of language transmission and language death. How is it that language is transmitted, and how is it that languages die in this kind of situation? What does the fieldwork reveal? And this is another instance in which, like, long engagement with the community is what has helped me to figure out how it is that this works. So there are differences in patterns of transition that may result in the misguided belief that there is no transmission of language taking place. So for example, one challenge is the Maroon worldview that no Maroon is viewed as having a natural right to knowledge. So even if you are a Maroon, that doesn't mean that I'm going to tell you anything. Knowledge of the uses of Maroon herbs, access to ancestral spirits, and Maroon science is seen as being potentially extremely dangerous if entrusted to the wrong person. So since this knowledge is equivalent to literal power, it is a power that Maroons have to really fight for. And so one of the stories that we know is of a younger Maroon person wanting to learn the herbs that were supposed to be used to heal a sickness. And so he went to one elderly Maroon, and the Maroon man told him just 2 of the herbs and said he'll tell him 2, but he has to find out the other one on his own. So he had to go around checking with other elders to see if he could get 2 that included the one that he did not know. And so that is how he figured that out. So persistence is what gets you knowledge in that context. My time cannot be up. The bottom line, what I wanted to highlight was that conducting linguistic fieldwork in this situation doesn't just involve prolonged engagement over a period of 6 months or a year that is typical of descriptive linguistics or even standard linguistic anthropology. It is prolonged engagement. You have to engage with people over the long haul. The breadth and width and depth of knowledge that I have only managed to gain after years and years of developing an understanding of the multiple layers that exist. And so if you were to just take what informants say, if you were to just look at it on one level, you leave with an understanding that is in fact superficial and incorrect without gaining in-depth understanding of how the culture works and how the ritual works. And the community expects, not the community as a whole, because you really can't view it as a whole. You have to develop relationships with individuals within the community. And through those individuals over time, they kind of take you into their confidence. and you integrate into the community. So Professor Devonish and I have spent years attending funerals, going to Christmas things, going to, no, not Christmas. I think one year we had to do Christmas for our informants. Going to funerals, speaking at funerals. Professor Devonish had to contribute towards building a house for one informant because his house was falling apart. And so all of this combined really helps the community to know that you are there because of a genuine interest in them. And they have an understanding that you're not there to exploit. And so that is my model for engagement in a ritual community. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Audine. We'll allow for 2 questions.
What if when I go to study the Maroons next, the same lady said to me, you see, Audine, I don't tell her one thing about Maroon culture.
You just go with it. Like, if she tells me she didn't tell Bilby anything, she didn't tell Bilby anything.
Yeah, but I guess that's the importance of, take into consideration everything. And it's the same way that the knowledge is kind of dished out in bits and pieces. Or that Bilby gets some and Audine gets some and so on.
So one
Then
of
you
the
put it
things that I
together.
wanted to point out was this, that is, what is central in that culture is this phrase that all Maroons know, which is chamu chamu yetu. And what chamu chamu yetu means is that you talk some and left some. So you never say all. You have to keep some for yourself because you can't give away everything that is important. And with the Maroons, it is more is kept than what is given.
And I think the other thing in connection with Bill B, the fact that LP mentions to you or us that, in fact, not only did she not tell him anything, but he has a footnote in the article, which she has, that says, which reverses
LP,
her initials to PL.
Told
and it
me
says,
nothing.
I lived with PL, but PL told me nothing. So it's in a footnote, right? Bill B establishes that.
Yeah.
The 2 other things, well, obviously, again, tribute to the field work and the stuff, the thing. What was the other point I was going to make? I forget now.
So this model of community engagement is something that, I don't know, I think it happens more naturally when the researcher has, I guess, some kind of affinity with the community members, right? So in that regard, so you say she like you, and I was thinking to myself, it's a spirit tech, right? My spirit tech you, fine,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Yeah, right? And it's, I read, when you were talking, I think back to the first time when I went to Guyana on a field trip, and I was looking at folk stories. And Joseph Tagalong, he was looking at pronouns, and we were trying to investigate the people. And we were asking to tell us dopey stories in the middle of the day. And we did young and fool, and it never worked. Fine? And we had to start to tell our stories that we know in Jamaica, and it was after that they started to warm up. And like just before the day was done, they tell me one story, and it was enough. And it was that kind of engagement that we had. Now, if you were going to replicate this model on a larger scale, one of the things I heard earlier this week was that the whole field trip thing is on a decline now. What would you do? What kind of things would you be proposing?
It's not necessarily about the field trip, but it's about once you are interested. So, for example, I was referring to the Kikongo group in St. Thomas. There hasn't been any significant linguistic research on that group. If somebody wanted to do research on that group, what would it require? It's not about a field trip, it's about how, as a researcher, you're going to approach how you engage with that community. And you have to be willing to, you have to understand, and I think it would be a similar experience in that community. You have to understand that you can't just go in, you can't just stay, even if you were to stay for a couple months, what you're going to leave with is not going to be a significant understanding of how the language and the culture works. It just doesn't work in that way. So for example, one thing, let me try to get this in because I didn't get to say it. One thing that I wanted to highlight too about this in Moortown, that ritual culture, is that the issue of when persons say they are not into the culture. So for example, when I went to Moortown, I thought that I would seek out who the specialists in Maroon culture were, and that is what I did. So I engaged with all of these old people because they were the persons that were knowledgeable. So I developed great relationships with many of them. The young people, not so much, because I didn't think that they knew anything. I spoke to some young people, obviously, because you're in the community and you interact with them, but not for the purposes of research. And it was after I left Moortown and began going back to Moortown that I realized the wealth of knowledge that young people have. So for example, rituals, the way that I found out that rituals can be individual and private, not a solo involving a ritual specialist or a rub trash involving a ritual specialist, but rub trash does involving yourself in your own yard. And you know how I found that out? One person who was not an informant had a situation, which I found out about. And that's the thing, when you develop this relationship, it's almost that you're a part of the community politics. So everybody tells you everything that is going on. So when I go back to the community, whatever major things happened while I was not there, I get detailed reports on. So I heard of one situation in which somebody, an older lady, well, a middle-aged woman, has a daughter that lives in Kingston. The daughter works. She did not know that the daughter was sick, but she had a dream. And in that dream, she saw her grandmother. And the grandmother told her that she need to call the daughter to come home right now because something wrong with her. So she called the daughter to say, what is happening? And then the daughter says, nothing. You sure you're sick? Well, I have a cut on my foot. I've had it for the past month and the cut won't get better. So the mother says, come home this weekend. This weekend, come home right away. When she comes home, the mother gets another dream. And she sees the grandmother, and the grandmother tells her which specific herbs she's supposed to go and collect, how she's supposed to collect the herbs, how she's supposed to use them, what she's supposed to do with them to heal the daughter's cut. Because obviously this is not a normal cut. This is an illness that is spiritual in nature. And this is somebody who has declared she doesn't like Maroons. They're evil, and they love to go to graveyard to call up ghosts, and she doesn't go to any of their celebrations, and she's not into any of it. However, the connection with the ancestor is still there, because you can have a personal ancestor, your grandmother, your grandfather, your father, that can can visit you, can pass on this knowledge to you. And that is an understanding that I would never have had I not continued in my engagement with the community. I would be one of the misguided persons saying, this culture is dying, this language is dying, and not understanding that there are multiple ways in which it continues to exist in the community. So, yeah, just wanted to add that because I didn't get to it.
Very nice. All right, thank you again, Audine, for that presentation. So next up, we have Professor Ian Robertson. Professor Rob is a professor of linguistics and the former dean of discipline in the Faculty of Humanities and Education at St. Karen, help me with this pronunciation. She's always correcting me. Augustine. Yeah. His career in his career, he has contributed significantly to the field of Caribbean linguistics. He is our father of field trip. Audine referred to him in her presentation. He has taken us on numerous field trips. Dr. Rob is also known for his discoveries of two Dutch Creoles people believe to not have existed, Skeppy Dutch and Berbice Dutch Creole. And he'll be presenting on Berbice Dutch Creole for us this evening. Dr. Rob, please give him a round of applause.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to say that I'm very pleased to be at this event. I guess I'm probably the person in the room who knows Hubert longer than anybody else. I even take the blame for getting him into this linguistics business. So all of you who suffered at his hands, mea culpa. Mea maxima culpa. And it's good to see the number of things that have happened. And it's particularly good for me to see how we have worked together. There's a thing in Ghana that we say, puppy ton dog. And he has a habit of referring to me as, well, he once called me on the same matter of field trips. When he discovered that I had taken my students on a field trip, and after I found it was successful, I called him up and said, listen, you want to send some students with me on a field trip? He said, you been on a field trip? He's a dog. He's a dog. So we have this dog thing, and yesterday when I saw him in his shirt that says, in one dog, a Mr. Dog, but back a dog, right? I understood fully what he meant by that. So it's good to be here and to see everybody come to this, or people beginning to recognize the kinds of significant contributions that he has made. Now, I am really going to try to get through this as quickly as possible, largely because it is again another part of my link with the Berbice Dutch community, and again, it's another dimension of field work that I find so very fascinating. Everybody knows I believe linguistics lives in the field. I recognize my theoreticians and so on, but linguistics lives in the field for me. So the people I want to talk about, the situation I want to talk about, in fact, relates to two interviews which I happen to have done round about the time when we visited, just after we visited Bertha Bell on the first, and the visit before the last one, because I did go back like 2 weeks later. And one of them actually lived in Dubai at the time. So I had a chance to interview them, to interview her. And the other one, interestingly enough, well, you'll hear about them both. Now, the informants were all, at the time, in their 70s. One was 72, the other one was, well, she didn't tell me her age, but I guess she was in her 70s as well. The male was, in fact, the son of Henny Hartman, whom I had interviewed in, I think, maybe 1979, 80, sometime like that, and who I think Sylvia would have interviewed as well subsequently. And the female was to discover the niece of one of the very first people that I interviewed back in 1975, and a lady who died within a few months of my interviewing her. And this business of people dying on my hands has become so familiar that I have developed a reputation as the midwife of language death. Interestingly, they were born on the Wiruni Creek, and the Wiruni Creek is a very important location in the final stages of Berbice Dutch, because it just seems as if most of the people who retained Berbice Dutch were from that area, although they might have moved to several other places and might have had a number of different experiences. They also they also lived in different places. One of them lived on Double A Ranch. She died within 2 months of my doing that, that recording. And the other one, I think he's still alive, but he was the younger brother of the lady that we saw, the 96-year-old lady, 99-year-old, 98.11 lady that we saw in the video a little while ago. So these were the two people with whom I had an opportunity to conduct 2 half-an-hour interviews, and I found them very interesting. When I heard about this thing, I said to me, listen, what on earth could I just look in the old papers and find and come and talk about? And I thought that what I should do is talk a little bit about the experience of dealing with them. First of all, I want to see that throughout the interview with them, because I was curious about their own competence, I decided I would speak to them only in Berbice Dutch. Insofar as my fragmented Berbice, my non-native speaking Berbice Dutch, I don't think it's too fragmented, but insofar as it allowed me to, I decided I would keep the entire thing in Berbice Dutch. What was striking to me was the way in which they responded, so I was also interested in the kind of language that they used in response to what I was saying to them. And I decided to use these things as some kind of measure of their own competence. And those levels I kind of determined by looking at accuracy of response. In other words, you ask them a question, do they respond appropriately? Does their response signal that they understood what the question was about? Secondly, well, not secondly in terms of importance, but also the length of time it took them to respond to the questions that I posed. Also, their own overt statements on their comprehension, and sometimes the length of the response, and finally, the number of utterances that they initiated in Berbice Dutch, because remember I said, I spoke to them exclusively in Berbice Dutch, and I asked them, and they responded in whatever they felt like responding in. So that's what that was about. Now, clearly one was male, the other one was female because of what I said earlier on. But I decided, let's look and see, just go through some of the samples, the examples of the responses and the behavior that we got. Now, the male, who was the son of Henny Hartman, I said to him, Wanga you bante? And he says to me, December 1932. Now, those of us who know Berbice Dutch would recognize immediately that he didn't understand the question, because I was asking him, where were you born? And he said to me, December 1932, which means that he was guessing, all right? And then I said to him, Wanga, Wanga, Wanga. And after I said that like 3 times, he recognized, Viruni, Viruni, you know? But it took him some while to sort of recognize the actual direction of the question. At another point in the interview, I say to him, Hofele toka yenwa habu danga titiwa yungu. How many children were in the area when you were young? And his response is, like, I ain't get you there. All right? Overt statement. And then I say, Toko, he said, children. So I say, how fella Toko? He looks at me again. And I said, in Maha Muso Toko, they had enough children? He said, 9. Now, while that might sound like a reasonable response, in fact, he was responding to how many children there were in his family. He wasn't responding to my question, which originally was asking him how many children were in the area at the time. So again, you see that his control was really very, very shaky at that point. At another point, I said to him, what he may you know colerte di lanchi, what make you not learn the language, right? And he says to me again, I ain't get you there. All right? So quickly, I began to recognize that this is somebody whose competence was really, at least at this point, his productive competence, even his receptive thing, was really very, very shaky. So I asked him at another point, you heard what I pan to you? Pan to you? You heard what I tell you? And he says, yes, but me not understand. All right? Now, he didn't understand. Yes, I heard you, but I don't understand. So it's an open statement. Then I say, Tichu Ayungu, you used to beefy the lanchi? You lie. He says, yeah. All right, so he seemed to understand that. And I said, Metewi. And then he calls out the name of some people who I had interviewed, and I think you would have interviewed some of them. You would have interviewed them as well. Rita, Amos, Rita was my own special. Rita was, in fact, the very first person with whom I did an audio recording of Berbice Dutch. Amos, he said, you beefy meted them, but just for a pastime. You notice what has happened? He's used the word beefy, which is the Berbice Dutch word for to speak. He said, you chat with them, but everything else is in English. All right? So although he's now beginning to warm up to, and this is way down in the interview, he's now beginning to warm up to it. He says, most of it is still in English. Towards the end, I said to him, why did you come over why did you leave the Berbice River? And he said, Eke la hante the Berbice River and sete hiri. I left the Berbice River and settled here, which is, again, interesting for me. I was interviewing him, actually, in Linden, which is in the Demerara area, a long way away from his home. And he says, yes, he moved and he's come here to live. Then I asked him about his father. I was asking him, in fact, I gave the wrong name. His father was staying at, and he said to me, no, which he seemed to understand that. Yeah, Komaka, near where you met him, when he beefy met you, he's shingy, all right? And so you see he's sticking in a few Berbice Dutch words again, but again, the very familiar words, beefy and shingy. And then towards the end of the interview, he says to me, you know, more of this I can understand, but I can't bring it out. I'm definitely in school now. On the other hand, by contrast to this man, the female, Irene Melville, yes. Irene Melville. So I'm speaking to her, and she says, I said to her, Eke kumte mete eke yerma, eke trau yerma, and eke esti toka, een man toka. I'm saying, I came here with my wife, my married wife, right? And it's important in Babis to distinguish between your yerma and your trau yerma, right? and I and my eldest son, a boy, right, a male. And she responds, this is the opening of our conversation, and she responds, that is nice. She clearly understood what I had said to her. Then I said to her, Wanga you bante, which is my kind of stock question for anybody that I'm interviewing. Where were you born? She says, Wiruni. But then she goes on, home, not in hospital. See? So she's giving me further information about herself, but again, she goes into English to do that. And then I asked her, Yende Papa used to beefy the language. Your father used to speak the language? No. Ori Fustan, but Orika Beefika. Now this is early in the interview. See how quickly she's into the Berbice Dutch. He's saying, no, he could understand, but he couldn't speak it. And then I say, you need a Madeline Rogers? Now, Madeline Rogers was one of the very first, she probably was the third informant that I interviewed in 1975, in October 1975. And she died shortly after. When I asked her that, she says, my aunt, Madeline Rogers was her aunt, Eke Mama Soswa, okay? My mother's sister. So again, you get this sense that she's in pretty much good control at a productive level, even though she didn't seem to be using it very often. Then I asked her, how fella yari you live for here? How long you living here? And she says, Diwari been in this house? How long have you been living there? She says to me, in this house? All right? So clearly, this is somebody who is in pretty good control. What about Henny Hartman, who is the father of the other guy? He says, Owalefa Krekebin, he used to live in the creek. Then at another point, I say to her, how fella talk up you habu? How many children you have? And she says to me, I can creek that dree, but ain't daughter, the boy. All right? But then she volunteered a number of utterances. She initiated a number of utterances in Berbice Dutch, and that is what, to my mind, made the big difference between her and the other guy. You see, well, she started by saying, whenever you worry, when are you going home? And when I answered her, she said to me, no, sorry. She started off by saying, you poka dishi candy, that is, you like this area, this place? Right? And then I told her yes. She then said to me, whenever you worry, when are you going home? And when I answered that one, she said to me, you muwengi moi titu mote worry. Now the other guy, in more than 100 utterances, did not initiate more than 2 sentences, and then they were just partial Berbice Dutch. This lady clearly had much better control. So the significant contrast, since somebody showed me a sign just now, are, first of all, that the comprehension levels of the female, of the Melville lady, are much higher than those of the Hartman guy. And the female also uses more Berbice Dutch in her responses. Obviously, she's using Berbice Dutch very easy. She has a facility with it. I pointed out she initiates more Berbice Dutch utterances. But also, importantly, she had a positive, I've got to say demeanor, because it's not so much what she said, It is how she dealt with it. There's a kind of, as she spoke about the language, you had this sense that she was glad that somebody was here talking to her about it and that she could get an opportunity to use it, because there are not that many people around who could even do what she was trying to do now. Now, there must be some explanations for these distinctions. To my mind, the first one is that the nurturing process in the area seemed to be very much one of people growing up with their grandmothers. I was really very struck by the number of females who said to me, including this very last one that we saw in the video, that she lived with her grandmother, and that's where she learned it. She actually said, when my grandmother's friends come to the house, I know we beefy, that's how you hear her. When they talk, it's so you hear. Okay? And she goes on to say, but they never put me to sit down and teach me the language. She says all that in Burmese Dutch. And this practice of having the children exposed to the older females seemed to me to have given them much greater exposure. The males tended to move out, which is what happened with the Hartman guy. He had moved out of the river and he was living in Demerara. So he wasn't sort of in the center of the community where he could get continuing exposure to the language. So the business of maintaining contact with the speakers was terribly important. And the business of having positive attitudes to Burmese Dutch and its use, I think, were critical to the I wouldn't finish the sentence, my time is up.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. Any questions? Comments?
Translate.
If you don't want to ask any questions, then thank you.
Any comments, anyone? All right. No problem. Round of applause for Dr. Rob. All right, so our next presenters, we have two presenters, Tamiran Delissa and Charlene Wilkinson. Charlene has been a teacher of English language and literature at the secondary level for the early part of her teaching career. She graduated from John Carroll University in Ohio with a BA in English in 1977 and from Windsor University in Canada with an MA in English in 1983. She has taught in Guyana, the U.S. Virgin Islands, New York City, and in Jamaica. She has also worked as a journalist and amateur theater director. She's currently a lecturer in the Department of Language and Cultural Studies in the Faculty of Education and Humanities at the University of Guyana. Her chief passions are education in the literary arts and teaching, creative writing, and drama. And she's now actively involved in language rights advocacy. So that's Charlene Wilkinson. And then we also have our next presenter, Tamiran Delissa. Tamiran is a lecturer of linguistics at the University of Guyana, Faculty of Education and Humanities. She earned her PhD at the University de Genève, right? Where she researched the area of child language acquisition of the syntax of her native tongue, Jamaican Creole. Her research interests include child language acquisition, Creole linguistics, sociolinguistics, language use in education, and translations. She is a translator of two classical novels, The Petit Prince and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, in Jamaican Creole. Let us welcome Tamiran and Charlene.
Okay, greetings, everyone. This is really what we would like to introduce you to today, the colloquium that happened in 2016, and how that transformed into the Guyanese Languages Unit.
Hello, everyone. All right, so I'm just going to quickly outline how we're going to run through the presentation. First, we will have the aims, followed by the background, We will go briefly into Charlene's journey, which led to the activism at the University of Guyana.
And then we will hear about Tamir's journey and how she came to Guyana and the entire formation of the GLU and the initiatives we now have. And then we'll ask you to dream with us a bit, because we need to dream very confidently about the future of the University of Guyana. So what we will do, take you through the activism that happened.
And we will be also outlining the plan of action for the GLU in terms of how we mobilize language planning and policy issues in Guyana. So, Charlene, why don't you tell them a little bit about Guyana?
Right. I really should say probably most of you know more about Guyana than I do, having come through with Professor Robertson as researchers. For those who don't know, Guyana is a pretty large landscape, but a very small population, less than 1 million people, and most of the people are still living on the coastland. Now, in terms of language, obviously, it would be quite clear to most of us in this room that the ethnicities that we have in Guyana would impact on the kind of language in terms of the varieties of Creole languages that are spoken, as well as the indigenous languages. So we have, all right, now if you look at the map, that's a linguistic map from Ethnologue. It may be inaccurate, but it still basically gives you the, do you mind if I hold it like this? Okay. It gives you the way the languages are spread out in Guyana. And if you look at the pink areas, that's where you would find the Patamona and the Makushi speakers. Down in the south, where you have the green areas, you have the Wapishan. Now, if you noticed the coastland area, now those, where you have indigenous languages on the coastland, that is where you have the endangerment because of the pressure to speak Creolese. And yeah, okay, sorry, the time, we have to really rush through this. But the point is that this linguistic diversity that is so great is masked by this tendency to see Guyana as the only English-speaking country in the world, and in South America. And that has in fact, affected the language policy itself. Now, we don't have a written language policy, but there's an assumption that everybody speaks English and should speak English. And that is, in fact, what this whole language rights movement is about.
So we'll go into Charlene's personal journey, which led to her political journey on the ground in Guyana.
Well, I mean, the personal journey that I would say was a linguistic moment for me that moved me from being what I would call a diglossic teacher was actually something very personal. And she actually walked in on her name. This is my daughter sitting over here. She came to Guyana at the age of 5. And 2 moments in my life, I would say 2 linguistic moments. She came to Guyana at the age of 5. 4, thank you. And 2 things happened. One day I saw her in the yard, schoolyard, actually was working in the kitchen. She would come home every day and be chatting away outside with her Jamaican friends. And I was conscious that she's out there chatting away. And then one day, I've never told this to her before, one day she disappeared. And I went outside because I had stopped hearing her. And I went outside and there she was with the children. And she was speaking like the children. So that was one. It was a really significant moment. Now, the other significant moment was my realization that I was a bit nervous about her taking on this language. The particular word that did it for me, or the particular phoneme that did it, was that ear sound. And she had a friend that she used to say, "Shumien." And I remember just momentarily being slightly afraid that she would be trapped in this language. And I really understand the naysayers, because there is a deep fear of being trapped in a language and not having access to the language of power. But for me, that was a moment that disappeared in no time at all. But it was that experience with my own child that sent me to look for Professor Devonish. So that's why I took so much time explaining it to you. Now, after she grew up, I returned to Guyana. She continued here, and I went back and worked at the university. Now, my activism began really just simply writing in the press. But then this key moment in 2011 happened when the Charter for Language Rights was ratified, signed on in Jamaica. I don't know how many people in the room were at that conference, but I was invited by Professor Devonish to go to that conference. And it built my own confidence about what I could do back in Guyana, because we now had the charter. And initially, of course, the focus was always on children's rights in the school system, and most of my activism was really in the press, writing letters. And then 1 year, we had and this is the importance of institutions and leadership, we had a head that was very supportive of what I was doing. And he said to me, let us do something serious in languages this year. And that's how the colloquium was born. Under the title, of course, Languages of Guyana, Theory, Policy, and Practice in Education and Beyond. And I was fortunate to get Guyana's most significant linguists to fly home on their own, on their own pocket, and the university funded the rest of it. So we had a lineup of people. Professor Robertson gave the keynote address. Professor Rickford came home. Professor Devonish gave the plenary address in the afternoon of the second day. Professor Keen Gibson came home as well. Ms. Jaggernaut came home. And we had a visitor. Some of you might know Professor Nicholas Farraklas from Puerto Rico. Now, what was significant about that colloquium is to my mind, was the audience. Ordinary teachers and students who had not been exposed to that kind of presentation before. And what all the linguists in the room attempted to do was to connect them to the reality of language and its relationship to history, culture, education. I remember Professor Robertson stressing that the church is significant because the church understood that you needed to know people's language. You needed to know that people need to get the knowledge in their own language, and he stressed that. So without apology, what I tried to do at the colloquium was get the ordinary teachers and students to understand that that scholarship, in fact, could shift that discourse, that diglossic discourse, to understand that all our languages were equal, and that they could actually play a part in transforming the socio-cultural, socio-political landscape. Now, at the end of the colloquium on day 2, what we did was put the participants into 18 groups. And Professor Robertson asked them 3 questions. How many languages are in your communities? What would you like to see happen in education in those languages? I can't remember what the 3rd question was. But almost every group, not almost, all the groups came out with a kind of action plan that they all wanted to see bilingual education in the school systems. This is 18 groups, and we had participants from every single linguistic community in Guyana. All the 9 indigenous languages that we tend to speak about, and the Creole. So, well, really now I'd like you to hear a bit about Tamir's journey, how she came to Guyana, and what happened subsequently.
So in terms of how did I get there? Guyana, that was nowhere on my list. Of course, I've been to Guyana on field trips with Prof before. As you know, students, we always need to go on these field trips. But this time, I had no plan of going to Guyana. I got back from Geneva, where I completed my PhD, and I was on my way to China to take up a job to teach English. But then Prof spoke to me. He asked me, there's this opportunity in Guyana. Why don't you go to Guyana? I'm like, no, Prof, I'm not going to Guyana. I've done everything, really. All I need to do is to book my flight, because I had already got my work permit and everything to go to China. But then I thought about it, and I was like, okay, then maybe it's better to go to Guyana. At least I won't be necessarily teaching boring English. Sorry for the English teachers. But I'll be doing what I love, which is linguistics, working in the field, working with Creole languages, etc., etc. So, of course, I changed my mind. I went back to Prof. Is it still possible for me to go to Guyana? He was like, yeah, sure. Just send your CV to whoever and blah, blah, blah. And it was done. And it was as simple as that. Of course, not so simple because of the bureaucracy. Well, not bureaucracy, but, you know, difficulties working on the ground in Guyana. But anyway, I got there, and immediately I was put in contact with Charlene Wilkinson, who, of course, I realized was somewhat struggling with her motive, which is similar to mine in terms of the Guyanese languages unit, to set up this language unit for advocacy in Creole languages and so on. So she had a proposal to set up the Guyanese languages unit some years ago, which was rejected at the faculty board, and we decided that we're going to look back at the proposal and represent it at the at the faculty board. This time we presented the proposal, and it was accepted. So we became the formal informal working group became the Guyanese languages unit. The languages unit is actually, in terms of where it is located now, we hope for it to change later, because we are in the language center, which is already a unit, really, that was there. I don't want to speak too badly about what's happening, but let me not mention that, which is in, sorry. Well, we're in the Language Center, which is in the Department of Language and Cultural Studies, in the Faculty of Education and Humanities, in the university. See how many layers we have to go to get to the Guyanese languages unit. Yeah, it's on top here because that's where we really want it to be. So what exactly who exactly we are in the Guyanese languages unit? Charlene, myself, a few other colleagues who are working with us, but of course, in terms of structure, we have not gone there as yet. In terms of the GLU, what are we doing? We aim to be the base for Guyanese language in working on issues relating to Guyanese languages, internationally, locally, whatever. We aim to integrate what we're doing in the faculty at the moment with what we plan to do in the Guyanese languages unit, using the students as our core in terms of collecting data for us and engaging in linguistic fieldwork. To provide support for teachers who are currently teaching Guyanese Creole students. Integrate Creole and indigenous languages into the formal educational process, and also to study language rights and, of course, have research in the area. To date, what have we been doing? Continue the advocacy for language policy and change in Guyana, involving teaching literacy in Creolese, has provided interfaculty linguistic support, carried out research in language attitudes, and we've initiated the revitalization that Deidre spoke about earlier. All right. In terms of the advocacy of language policy, we basically try to appeal to the media. So the print media, I just have a quick photo here of an article we did with collaborating with Prof. Devonish also in the Stabrook News. There is TV and radio broadcasts that we would try to engage in. We also use the internet a lot in terms of the websites that we created, Facebook, newsletter, and so on. And as a result of that, we have witnessed change in attitudes already. So last year, one student reported that Creole is a broken language, but this year, her perspective was different. In the New Road newsletter, she stated that Guyanese Creole is something we should own because it is ours to keep. In the interest of time, of course, I don't need to go through that. Importantly also, we had a lengthy debate. I mean, not a long time span, but like every week, every couple days, there was a new article in the Stabrook News. And Mr. Ori, his stance was that learning Creolese is a waste of time and valuable resources. It is not our national language, nor is it our mother tongue. But in May, which is just 2 months after all this debate, I'm happy to read that his response in the paper was, I have changed my mind about the teaching of Creolese at a university level. Teaching Creolese does promote growth of the Guyanese culture, which will have an immeasurable value to Guyanese. In terms of the indigenous languages, also, I just quickly quote the minister here, where he says, if our indigenous people do not know their language, they are not complete. Okay, so teaching literacy in Creolese, we have done workshops and summer course. Of course, teaching literacy also is involved in some of the core courses that I teach to the students. We have developed basic materials like an alphabet card and a workbook that we use to teach the language. I had a video there, but I won't bother to waste. No, sorry, just use time to play it. Definitely not waste. In terms of, it's a video where we have Charlene teaching. If we have time at the end, definitely I'll do that. In terms of the initiatives, again, we have the interfaculty support, where we are working, or we are working with the Faculty of Health Sciences with a contact study, where we have done some transcriptions for them using the Guyanese Creole writing system, because they realize that it is difficult for them to do their work when the speakers are actually speaking the Creole language and they can't transcribe it. In terms of the language attitude surveys, here, I won't go through this at all. But what we find here is that we did 2 sets of surveys, where you have the general language attitude surveys, which is the pattern bars, and the solid bars are language attitude surveys specifically for teachers. And what we find is that the attitudes that the teachers have are generally more positive, which is a good thing for me, because these are the persons who are there to teach the children. So later on, if their attitudes are positive, we expect that the society will become positive at some point. This just continues the same point. For example, you have Guyanese Creole is a language. 79% of the teachers agreed, comparison to 54% of the general public. Revitalization, I won't bother to go in that because Deidre has covered it totally. In terms of a way forward, we have just proposed here, time is up by the way, just proposed here a few things we can do in terms of the areas of research and what needs to be done. But before we close, I invite Charlene to read from Language and Liberation. Go ahead.
I just thought because we were the last people, it would be perfectly apt for me to read the very last paragraph of this book, which speaks to almost everything that has been said in this conference. The state constitutes the political entity set up to govern these spaces. Where is it? The struggle has been, as documented in this work, that of defining the nation. Is the definition restricted to the tiny elite, which prides itself on control of the ex-colonial European language and its cultural values and practices? Or does it represent the mass of speakers of Creole languages and endangered indigenous languages and their cultural values and practices? If it is the latter, then the role of the state is clear. It should seek to protect, preserve, promote, and, where appropriate, even revive Creole and indigenous languages. Which nation, and I underlined this on the slide, but you didn't see it, which nation the state represents, however, continues to be in dispute. The struggle continues. And with that, we invite any questions. Sorry, I was so nervous.
Having done this in Jamaica, if that makes what you're doing any easier, and I'm looking at the comments that you posted pointing to a quick turnaround in terms of the attitude of the student, quick turnaround of the journalist. Now, everybody would have followed what was happening in Jamaica. I know they're seeing the same thing happening in Guyana. Do you think that has anything to do with the shift in the attitude so quickly?
Well, I would like to say, I mean, Professor Robertson would probably wrap my knuckles if I didn't point out that the Guyanese movement for language consciousness, language awareness really began way back in the 70s. And we might be bold enough to say that we probably were a little ahead of the Caribbean in that sense. What happened between then and now is still up for discussion. I don't know what it is that happened in Guyana. Mass migration of linguists, of course. Tamir is literally the only PhD right now in linguistics at the university. Thankfully, she is so young, and that hopefully she will not leave. That's the other thing. So that's the thing. She keeps threatening me every other week. So the shift, I really am very hopeful. I don't think it's so difficult to shift. So our presence here is a kind of mission. It's a mission to say, we need you. We need you back home, old and young, or whoever think the old. Because Guyana is ready, our students are clearly ready. We see that every day. Tamir has actually got 2 research students right now who have openly going to be doing Creole orthography and Creole literacy with their groups.
All right, so if there are no questions, we've come to the end of this session. Can we give all our presenters a round of applause?
So, evening everybody. Evening everybody. Alright, so from yesterday we are talking about how Professor Devonish build up institution, but the English word institution, remember me about madhouse. So, me are saying build up place. And we are saying build up place we make out of block and cement. But in build up things, them what happen in the place too. And me thinking build up the building them because people use the building and are people him interested in, are people him care about. But me would lie if me never say him, that him no mash down people too. He mash down people when him mind tell him say the foundation not strong and never build upon source of sand. But then him take him time and build them up back, little by little, build them up trang, so till not even them can believe. Somebody tell me, say, when them young, them they think say them could have changed the world. But now that them get old, them find out say them can't beat them one. Devonish realized that long time. And that make him join company with so much different people. And fast in a education people business, him fast in a music people business, in a literature people business, psychology, economics, geography, and enough other else things. I'm sure we say you can do enough more things when you join up with other people. So tonight, we are going to hear from one of them people there, the patois doctor, Carolyn Cooper. All right, so there was an introduction written for Professor Cooper by a student of mine, Anisha Walker, but she fell ill and couldn't make it. So just pretend as if you have heard it, and I'm going to say that before I knew of a Hubert Devonish, the public intellectual language was Carolyn Cooper for me. So I used to read her articles in Jamaican, written in the Cassidy system, in the Jamaica Observer, her bilingual column at the time. And so I couldn't figure out, why people were having problems reading the Cassidy system. So she has been that public face for a very long time. She's also an institution builder, having started the Reggae Studies Unit, having headed the Department of Literatures in English, and contributed to UE in various ways. But her role as a public intellectual, and Professor Devonish would know this, has made her a beaten stick. So she's kind of the go-to name after Devonish that everybody likes to hate when it comes to patois. So tonight she's going to tell us about her collaboration and her academic and personal friendship with Professor Devonish over these many years. Put your hands together, please.
Thank you very much, Joseph. No, I'm not going to give you a theoretical account of collaborative research in the humanities. Instead, what I'm going to do is talk about the practical experiences that I've had working with Hubert. And don't panic, I'm not going to keep you here for an hour and a half. The day is long gone, and I admire the stamina of those of you who have been here from 10 o'clock. So I'm going to try to do a little, 9, rotted. So I'm going to have to do, that's almost 12 hours. So I'm going to do a little cutting and things so that we can move fast. Now, I met Hubert in 1980 when I came to teach at Mona in what was then the Department of English, now Literatures in English, and soon to be rebranded yet again to introduce film studies, or FLIM as we say in Jamaican Creole. Hubert was teaching in the Department of Linguistics and Use of English, which has evolved into Language, Linguistics, and Philosophy. We soon discovered that we had shared interests in Caribbean languages and literature. But Hubert was a strict gatekeeper. Linguistics was a science, and mere humanists needed to tread carefully and respectfully in this specialist field. Karen Carpenter wittily conceives her forays into linguistics as trespassing. I think of my own explorations into protected territory as moonlighting, with all the transgressive associations of secretive night work. My rather elementary study of linguistics was a labor of love, and I felt completely entitled to follow where my heart led, even if Hubert disapproved, and he often did. In 1988, I explored a long time, and it was amazing how time goes. I experimented with Jamaican as a language of literary analysis, and I must thank Dr. Velma Pollard, educator and creative writer, for inspiring that experiment. I was writing a paper on Sister in Theatre Collective's Lionheart Gal, Life Stories of Jamaican Women, edited by Honor Ford Smith. One morning, I went over to Velma's house and began telling her about it. At that time, we both lived in College Common, just one house apart. University housing provides a distinct opportunity for cross-disciplinary conversations, but not many academics seem to appreciate this fact. I said to Velma, me feel say, Anna, fix up what the woman them say. Velma's laugh in response went something like this. You see, you literature people, by the time you don't write the paper, it's not going to sound nothing like that. I decided to take up Velma's challenge to write the paper in Jamaican. And because I'd already written a fair bit in English, I tried to translate what I had into Jamaican. That was a big mistake. When I read my first attempt to both Velma and Hubert, who also lived in College Common, and we used to chat a lot in College Common, they stopped me in my tracks. The Jamaican translation sounded stilted, bearing the markings of its English genesis. What I needed to do was to think the paper through in Jamaican, and that's what I proceeded to do. The final version, which is published in my book, Noises in the Blood, is bilingual. I certainly was not going to throw away the section I had already written in English. Now, I'm one of those academics who believes in recycling papers. My mantra is no good paper should be given only once. Especially if it's different audiences. You can't do all that work and give the paper one time. Anyhow, young people, you must learn and listen. Listen and learn. Okay. There's a clear linguistic fissure in the text which somewhat paradoxically attempts to cross the divide between Jamaican and English and between the oral and scribal traditions. So this is how I made the transition. Recognizing the dialogic nature of oral scribal and Jamaican English discourse in the story text Lionheart Gal, and seeking to narrow the social distance between the language of the stories and the language of textual analysis, I wish to engage in an experimental Jamaican subversion of the authority of English as our exclusive voice of scholarship. My analysis of the testimonies of the women of Sistine, their verbal acts of introspective self-disclosure, will now proceed in Jamaican. I use the Cassidy orthography, which differs markedly from the English-oriented orthography of the Lionheart Gal text. Quote, "We come together and talk our life story and put it in a little scene," unquote. As so Eva say, Sistine start off, I tell one another story. So you tell me tales, so tell you all, we find outside one story where I tell woman's story. The same thing over and over. But it's not easy to get up, tell people your business, ma. It take plenty heart. Suffolk say in a fair story, she said, quote, "Plenty women used to talk about the children that we have and the baby father problem. At first, me was shy to talk about myself. The impression women always give me is that them is a set of people who always lap them tail, take your name, spread tablecloth. But it feels sort of funny at the time having children for two different men, especially since me never like Archie. Me never discuss it with nobody. When we come meet Didi and hear she talk about her baby father and how she hate him after she get pregnant, me say, well, if you can't say your own, me can't say mine, for we actually depend on the same thing. Me and she start talk about it," unquote. So here's my language of analysis. And at the same facts as she come to find out so that the things them that happen to we just because we are woman, them the things supposed we call politics. Just like any of the other big things that were going in a politics, as the one Peter Tosh himself. Then what a way then kill him off? Me don't know if I big politics that are like a politics, but sinting must in a sinting. But that is another story. And the oil that fries Sprat can't fry Jack. So small fry, all like me, not supposed to business in a them the things. Now, for the Lionheart Gal essay, I asked Celia Blake, who was then a graduate student in the Department of Linguistics and Use of English, to convert, can you imagine Celia, to convert my chaka-chaka writing system into Cassidy. And my decision to use a specialist orthography, which Hubert certainly approved, marked a departure from conventional wisdom. Popular orthographies for Jamaican depend exclusively on English orthography, what I call colonialism inscribed. With varying degrees of skill, amateur linguists adapt the notoriously irregular writing system of English to suit the sounds of Jamaican. Now, the dependence on English orthography has decided advantages for readers already literate in English. They know the spelling conventions such as they are. Although there's often wide variation in the representation of sounds in the individualized systems of each writer, readers can usually figure out what the symbols mean. The common English orthography base makes the idiosyncratic systems mutually intelligible, as we see on the internet now. Mervyn Morris, editor of Louise Bennett's selected poems, Mikey Smith's Itacom, and Jean Breeze's Rhythm Ravings, gives a common sense rationale for the writer's choice of an English-looking orthography for Jamaican in his essay, Printing the Performance, quote, "But anxious not to be rejected unread, most of us have chosen compromise. The most common, if inconsistent, approach is to write the vernacular for the eye accustomed to standard English, but with various alterations signaling Creole." Skipping a little bit. For potential readers of Jamaican who are not literate in English, the consistency of the Cassidy system is advantageous. Vernacular literacy can be acquired in a coherent system unmarred by frustrating exceptions to every rule. Access to literacy, not necessarily literacy in English, is thus facilitated. Conversely, the reader who is already literate in English is forced to temporarily surrender the privileges of literacy. This loss of status levels new and old illiterates, narrowing the social distance between privileged and non-privileged groups. Now, a year later, I collaborated more substantively with Hubert on another academic project. Longtime Gleaner columnist Maurice Cargill had written one of his usual contemptuous articles with a mocking headline, "Corruption of Language is No Cultural Heritage." He attempted to ridicule the lucid arguments made by Dr. Myrtle Thompson in support of bilingual education for Jamaican students in an article also published in the Gleaner. For more than 2 decades, Dr. Thompson taught use of English at Mona, and she certainly understood the complexities of language teaching and learning in Jamaica. With typical disdain, Cargill argued that Dr. Thompson, quote, would like to see patois retained as part of our cultural heritage and believe that it can occupy that honorable place alongside the teaching of standard English, unquote. Cargill made his own position absolutely clear. Quote, I, on the other hand, take the view that if it is what is called our cultural heritage, it is a lousy heritage redolent of slavery, and that if we keep on saying it is a great thing, it merely encourages its continued use until it will finally swamp what remains of standard English in Jamaica. Of necessity, most people have inherited patois, but I see no reason to make a virtue of necessity, unquote. Making a virtue of necessity, I knew that it was imperative to respond to Cargill and in the Jamaican language. Too often we defend the Jamaican language in English. In addition to writing the response in Jamaican, I also decided to use the Cassidy orthography again. Not now for an academic audience, but for a popular one. This time I asked Hubert to convert my chaka-chaka spelling into the specialist writing system which I was just beginning to learn. Hubert readily agreed. The headline I came up with for the article was, Chow, Mr. Cargill, respect due. It was primarily a reference to Cargill's disrespect for the Jamaican language, but also for Dr. Thompson. First, he assumed she was male, and then when he was corrected, he made matters worse. Quote, Miss Thompson, or is she Miss or Mrs.? It did not seem to have occurred to Cargill that she could have been doctor. Unfortunately, there was Guyanese Creole interference in Hubert's rendition of my Jamaican Creole headline. Respect became respect. But I had so much respect for Hubert's authority as the expert in the field, I didn't dare proofread his text, and so I didn't pick up the error. And there were a couple of other errors that might have been made by the Gleaner proofreaders. There was English interference in the spelling of some words. For example, bark was not spelled B-A-K, to was not spelled T-U, and off was not spelled A-A-F, off and bark and to. But these spelling errors were relatively minor. The substance of the article was what really mattered, and it generated quite a bit of controversy. This was the first time that the Cassidy orthography was being used in a newspaper article, as far as I could tell. And what irritated so many adults was that their children could easily read the text and they could not. Liberated from the vagaries of English orthography, the children easily decoded the unfamiliar text. And so did adult readers who were receptive to the new orthography. For example, Mr. Andrew Sewell, a Rasta man who used to deliver mail in College Common, read and understood the article. Now, Mr. Sewell is supposed to deliver letters and not discourse on letters, but he was a very sensible man. And he went straight to the heart of the matter, quote, it full the space of our real African language, unquote. The very strangeness of the orthography restores to Jamaican its integrity. It gives the language and its speakers presence, a political issue. Mr. Sewell's full, the preferred Jamaican equivalent of the English fill, fulfills an expectation of completion and closure in the transfer of culture across the Atlantic, filling up the void of that, quote, deep amnesiac blow, unquote, that was a missile passage to cite the early Derek Walcott, his poem Laventille. So here's my response to Morris Cargill. I may not be able to read all of it, but I'll give you a little of the flavor. What a nice background man Mr. Cargill is he? Look how I'm so sorry for poor, ignorant black people. No want no whole heap of backward people, this a walk about Jamaica, equal up themselves, and go on like say, them attack language just like him. Him a fool up them, a fool up themselves. No man. Mr. Cargill want the whole of we fi know we place. In what we fi know, say we come in like puss and dog. We can bark and bite and make nice and show say we becks and kin with it. But language, culture, what name so? We don't know them the high word master. Them breed a word don't go pass out a background mouth. Take for instance, you ever hear say puss and dog sit down and talk about how puss and dog talk nice? No man. Puss and dog talk like me and you, but then I talk about talking. That's how Mr. Cargill would have called abstraction. Me know plenty of Mr. Cargill big with them, you know. Me they go to good school and they have good teacher like Dr. Ms., Miss, Mrs., Mr. Thompson. Sure, Mr. Cargill, do better than that, respect you. Them the days teacher was a high something, a noble profession, and an honorable calling, not like the thief and liar them. Cargill was a lawyer. And the pay used to be a little better, you could have lived off of it. And all in the country, the people in the district would have bring little food and little something for the teacher because them know how it go. Government could have never pay a teacher to take interest in your picnic. And because teacher, they just love to pass on the knowledge, why plenty of them did even bother. Money never come in at this business. Now it's a different story. And you can't blame the teacher them. Dollar slide and everybody a slide with it. Uncle one and you are the old time teacher them left back in the school them. The rest of them are selling insurance, or them are do management studies, or them gone to law school, or them turn minibus conductor, or them are do little higgler and all in the staff room, or them gone, we're all together, just like the nurse them. So nobody much not did if you teach a poor people them. Only if you come at university, can talk to the teacher them where I teacher them where I go there if you go teach. And uno no bother blame patwa. For if them was a pay teacher a little better money, plenty of them people who can talk nice English would have out there teach. So Mr. Cargill, we're glad you're sorry for it. And we're glad to see how you take poor people interest to heart. But you know, sir, me always frightened when me hear say them I said mongoose will look after chicken. Yes, sir. I know Mr. Cargill, you must feel like you say when you talk in a language. And since we talk that they talk, we can talk English too. So they must think say we can read Gleaner. So them can go and throw word power in a Gleaner because when I buy Gleaner. Well, now that other people are trying to set the record straight, you know, sir. Some of the ignorant black people, they might have stopped by Gleaner till the people them where sell Gleaner start to treat you like so we are smarty and not puss and dog. Mr. Cargill, for your people them say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never harm me. Well, for me people not that fool. We know say a true word by any other name smells so a same way. I know they should have remember say what joke for not dead for you because we know say a man like you could have never that fool if you go believe say that Jamaican patois no language. You just say them the thing for make people blood boil and for low rate for make we feel say we are not nobody. Well, we can't stop it from laugh after black people. But since you bring up the slavery business, we better remind you, say, at the same back of people them, where laugh after black people language now that it stop African people from talking their own language in Jamaica. Because they never want we to band together and talk, so we could have planned out to kill them off and get away, like them and ruin them. And it's only because what is pure can't be unpure that we shape up we own a language out of what we bring in our head, mix up with what then they force and power we, and we're not going to make nobody take it from we, is we history and we culture and we make it original Jamaican, a few language. We will try to learn Mr. Cargill people them language because it suits we. Everybody everywhere try to learn English. And plenty of we in Jamaica feel say English a few language already. Then beat it in a way and we take it turn back on them. Whenever you hear about Caliban, go read Shakespeare, The Tempest. For a long time, Shakespeare him did see what was going to happen. We turn around to cuss English people them in their own language. And if you go read what George Lamming him writing at The Pleasures of Exile. But Mr. Cargill, make me left it to Miss Lou. She will fix your business. She say, bands are killing. So you're the man me hear about, are you them say I take all the English words so that you're going to kill dialect? Let me get it straight, Master Charlie. For me to understand, you're going to kill all English dialect or just Jamaica one. If you're equal up with English language, then what make you going to feel inferior when it comes to dialect? If you can't sing links in market and water come at your eye, you have to tap sing all lang syne and coming through the rye. That language where you're proud of, where you honor and respect. Poor Master Charlie, you know, say that it spring from dialect. That then start to try turn language from the 14th century, 500 years gone, and then got more dialect than we. You have to kill the Lancashire, the Yorkshire, the Cockney, the Broad Scotch, and the Irish brogue before you start to kill me. You have to get the Oxford Book of English Verse and tear out Chaucer, Burns, Lady Griselle, and plenty of Shakespeare. When you don't kill wit and humor, when you kill variety, you have to find a way to kill originality. And I know you that read the English book there by yourself, for if you drop a H, you might have to kill yourself. Classic. Classic in the soup. All right. So, all right. Now, Hubert, where is it now? Come up, shut up. Now, Hubert had written notes to the orthography, which should have been placed at the beginning of the article. Nonsensically, the notes were placed at the very end with the original description intact. Notes on the Jamaican Creole system used in the following statement. Clearly, nobody on the editorial team at the Gleaner was taking the article seriously. Nevertheless, that newspaper article, produced out of the collaboration between Hubert and me, played an important role in enabling me to write a bilingual newspaper column for the Jamaica Observer starting in 1993. Can't believe it, 25 years ago. Much to the distress of the editors, I insisted that the Jamaican language was married to English, just like scarce and plentiful produce in the market. If they wanted a column at all, they would have to take it in both languages. I called the column Woman Tongue. I substituted a U for the O in woman and put both the W of woman and the UE of tongue in parentheses to simultaneously signify English and Jamaican. And despite the constant attacks from readers who were angered by my use of Jamaican, the column was an important affirmation of the value of Fiwi language. As recently as this month, a man greeted me on the street with woman tongue. I asked him, you still remember that? I stopped writing for the Observer 20 years ago, and it was all because of Mutty Perkins. I don't have the time to tell that story here. You can visit my blog, Jamaican Woman Tongue, for details. Now, in 1992, Hubert and I began collaborating on a truly innovative academic enterprise, reggae studies. In December that year, Olivia Babsy Grange, who was not a minister of government at the time, as you know, she has important roots in the music industry, she organized a seminar on reggae music as a business, hosted by Spec Shang Music, Inc. and Sandosa Limited, in collaboration with the Eagle Merchant Bank, the National Commercial Bank, and the Trafalgar Development Bank. The primary purpose of the seminar was to explore ways of establishing a venture capital fund for the industry. But attention was also paid to the culture of reggae. I was invited to present a paper that I titled Cultural Implications of Marketing Reggae Internationally. I focused on the mixed reception of Buju Banton's anti-homosexuality song, Boom Bye Bye. I prophetically argued that the fate of that controversial song in the international market, particularly in the US and the UK, where highly politicized LGBT activists wield substantial power, was a test case of the degree to which local Jamaican cultural values could be exported without censure into a foreign market. I asked a number of questions. How then should the reggae artists respond to this marketing problem? Adapt the message to suit the export market, sacrificing authenticity for airplay? Should the artists do one kind of song for the local market and another for export? Admittedly, in the age of the internet, the distinction between local and international markets is purely academic in the worst sense of that word. Should the reggae artists risk censorship in order to maintain the cultural integrity of the Jamaican way of seeing the world? In my role of cultural critic, I assumed the burden of communal responsibility for the youthful DJ who had put himself at risk by running up his mouth. I concluded my presentation with a clear warning: the DJ must learn to censor her himself, otherwise somebody else would do the censoring. The reception of my presentation by the local Jamaican audience was so positive that on my way home from the Jamaica Conference Center, it occurred to me that the reggae music industry would benefit from academic support that could be provided by the University of the West Indies. A proposal was submitted to faculty board and approved. The Reggae Studies unit was placed within the Institute of Caribbean Studies and launched in the 1994 academic year. I was appointed as a coordinator. Now, 22 years later, the Institute issued a call for papers for a conference in which I was described as a co-founder of the Reggae Studies unit. I immediately sent an email to the director with the following recommendation, quote, instead of designating me as co-founder of the Reggae Studies unit, I'm suggesting that you just say that I conceived the Reggae Studies academic program at Mona, unquote. Now, one of the problems that arise within large institutions like the University of the West Indies is that latecomers do not always know the history of particular enterprises and so make unfounded assumptions. Even though there are countless minutes of meetings, these are not always consulted. I sent an email to Hubert on the co-founder business, and his initial response was most amusing. Who is it claimed you co-founded it with? I didn't see any duppy alongside you. It was your idea, and you asked me to help you write it up. It was you who stood on the stage at the Creative Arts Center, I think, and collected the first financial contributions for the center. Didn't notice any shadows alongside you, but then my eyesight has always been bad. Hubert later sent me an even more explicit mail on the matter, copied to both the director of the institute and the dean. Dear all, I hadn't up until now been privy to the discussion about the founding of the Reggae Studies unit, originally conceived of as the International Reggae Studies Center. My recollection of the process is that Caroline Cooper came up with the idea. I know I was subsequently drafted in to help with actually drafting the proposal, help which I rendered on Caroline's front veranda in College Common. It's the importance of residential community. I gather that my name may have been attached to the draft. If that is so, this was most likely at Caroline's insistence, given her stubborn determination to always call my name when she speaks of the origins of the unit. Caroline was the advocate for the proposal right through the institutionalizing process, the person who presented it at the various levels of the university. She was both, therefore, the originator of the idea and the driving force behind it being set up, arguing for it at all levels. This is the amusing part. If I played any role, it was as a willing conscript, carrying out functions which I was asked to perform to assist, helping as I would any colleague in pushing forward with any ideas that they may have. I'm a little embarrassed that her generosity in acknowledging my role may be distorting history. This is a really funny part now. I can claim no paternity here, either natural or via in vitro fertilization. The Reggae Studies unit is, as with many of Caroline's ideas and projects, a product of immaculate conception. She is, as we all know, very capable of coming up with bright ideas on her own and implementing them. Hope this clears things up. Now, Hubert's witty email does not indicate the full extent of his drafting. Even if he was not the baby father, he certainly played an important post-conception role. He fleshed out my ideas, bringing a multidisciplinary perspective to the enterprise. Of course, there was language and literature, and media and communications, but also physics for the study of sound technology. Our vision was rather grand, and Hubert remained a constant supporter of the unit through all its ups and downs, like a good parent, whether biological or adoptive. Another important collaborative project I did with Hubert was a news report for Muta Baruka's Cutting Edge program on IRFM. In the late 1990s, Muta asked me to do a weekly report in Jamaican. Neither Muta nor I can remember the exact date. We are both senior citizens. I immediately invited Hubert to help implement the proposal. At the time, the Gleaner used to publish on Sunday a summary of the big news stories from the previous week. I suggested that we translate that Gleaner summary into Jamaican. Hubert agreed and recruited Myrtle Thompson, Jean Wellington, and Danais Juggernaut to assist with translating. We called the resulting program Big Things Last Week. It was very popular, but ended because there was no funding to sustain the work of the enthusiastic volunteers. Now, that project may well have planted the seeds for the much later media work done by the Jamaican Language Unit to broadcast the news in Jamaican. Then in 2014, Hubert asked me to co-host with Tien Robinson a public affairs program in Jamaican on News Talk 93. Again, it was very popular, but it did not last. Now, Hubert also collaborated with me to co-author a chapter of my book, Sound Clash, Jamaican Dancehall Culture at Large. We call the chapter The Dancehall Transnation, Language, Literature. Oh yes, here it is. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, little use.
Yeah, use, man. Yeah, plenty use. Okay. Back it, back it,
One
back it,
News
back
Talk
it.
93 FM.
Back it up, back it
So
up.
tune in every Thursday.
Pull up.
Food.
We
Big
are.
things are going for Jamaica. One News Talk 93 FM. So tune in every Thursday. 4:13 in the afternoon with Carolyn Cooper and Tien Robinson. And you see if you don't get to listen then, catch it again. Every Saturday, 3:13 in the afternoon. Big things are going. A program will look on the things we are going in a Fubi country in a Fubi language.
Yes,
Big
man.
things are going
Yes,
in a
yes.
Fubi language.
Yes, yes, yes.
Walk
One
on,
more
peace.
week, one more week, man. Tell us the
Yes.
year around this is June.
June.
Jesus. Before you know it, year done.
Year done. Summer, then
Yo.
Christmas, then year done.
Anyhow, good to be back with you, no? By
Yeah,
the way,
man.
on the calling, you know, give the people the number.
Yeah, man, calling, man. 702-2585, 702-3470, 977-7638. Digicel 618-1823.
Yeah, man.
And if you want text, number 899-7657. I hit that.
Yeah, a long time we know you're nothing from.
A long time we know you're nobody
so
say
no out
nothing.
there listening, you know.
Exactly.
And then if you call in, I make we know, say, boy, say, where we are doing, I like it.
Yeah,
Not
man.
true, my friend.
Straight.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. So we have one nice program.
Yeah, man.
Tell them about it, Tien. Tell them.
This a brother here put him a put a long time I put on play and him put on play for all high school pitney them. If you can watch him play and
Mhm.
film play them about school pitney straight and what go in a classroom about young people and how young people stay.
Where name?
Force ripe.
Where him name?
Oh, Fabian Barrett.
Hey, I'm a teacher. I know about the teacher runnings.
Why we don't know about it, but he know about it.
Yes,
and
I
he
like
play
him.
them force ripe. Yeah, man.
But they look at them force rap, especially like a girl pick them.
Girl pick them force
when
rap.
them a rush to get a whole for they don't know say, oh, it's so sweet to be one like a picnic.
They don't understand.
I run in a big woman business where they don't
And if
know for them.
force right, who out there know what force right be?
Just a little taste of it. Now, back to the article that Hubert quoted with me in the book, Sound Clash. Now, my writing style is quite different from Hubert's. I suppose he would say his is scientific and mine is metaphorical. So we had to negotiate to end up with a language we would both consider representative, and I think we succeeded. Now, as I come to the end of my presentation, I must talk about, to be fair to the process, I must talk about some instances in which collaboration did not work out as I had expected. About 5 years ago, I had the idea to establish at Mona a multidisciplinary cross-faculty center for the creative industries and cultural enterprise. It was an outgrowth of the degree program in entertainment and cultural enterprise management that the Reggae Studies unit had established and offered for a year before a former dean appropriated it for the Institute of Caribbean Studies, refusing to give the unit access to the funding earned from teaching summer school courses, university politics. But that's another story. Naturally, I shared the proposal with Hubert and later Deborah Hickling, whose expertise in the field enhanced the draft. When the proposal was submitted to the campus principal, I included both Hubert and Deborah as co-authors because of their input. The proposal did not receive the support of the principal, who informed me that it was not supported by my faculty. It was in fact sabotage from within. I was asked by a faculty member, who must remain unnamed, if the center was a post-retirement project. It was not. I retired as soon as I could. Now, as you might have heard yesterday evening, Dean Wariboka asked Hubert to develop a new interdisciplinary degree program for the faculty based on my proposal and his input in it. Now, I thought Hubert could have asked me to collaborate, but he did not. And I should have learned from that experience that academic collaboration, like sex, must be consensual. But I did not. Last year, when I thought that the Jamaican language unit was turning 10, it was actually 15. I asked Hubert what he was going to be doing to mark the occasion. He said that because of resource constraints, both human and financial, it seemed unlikely that the anniversary would be marked. Now, I did not read the subtext of that statement carefully enough and blithely offered to give a lecture. Hubert sent the following email. My dearest Caroline C. You must be cautious when you hear those kinds of things, you know, ladies. My dearest Caroline C., thanks for the offer, which is eagerly accepted. The Cassidy LePage Distinguished Lecture Series special lecture celebrating 15 years of JLU. Carolyn Cooper, Disguise of the English Language, Louise Bennett's Anansi Poetics. Tentatively on International Creole Day, Thursday, 26 October 2017, we'll try to get the undercroft for 5:30 p.m. And I'd also ask him about what happened to our program, Big Things. Go on. On Big Things, we had suspended, waiting to restart when we got restored our slot of new stock. Still negotiating on that one. Thanks again for all the support and solidarity through the years. You made the long journey of 15 years seem short, 10 years. We will be in touch in about a week once planning for the lecture gets underway. Now, to sustain my unscientific carnal metaphor, let me tell you that appearances can be very deceiving in academic matters as in sex. Remarkably, in his introduction of me at the lecture, Hubert outlined all of the many times I had trespassed in linguistics. I was alarmed, but it served me right. I had forced myself on JLU and had to take full responsibility for my coercive actions. Despite this error of judgment on my part, I must state unequivocally that the sustained pleasure of consensual collaboration with Hubert on so many subjects for more than 3 decades is long-lasting. One of the highlights of our academic intercourse, was Hubert's unsolicited invitation for me to give the closing plenary lecture at the 21st Biennial Conference of the Society for Caribbean Linguistics held at Mona in 2016. I spoke on the topic, To the World, Reggae, Dancehall, and the Globalization of Jamaica. I was definitely not trespassing at that conference. As Hubert joins me in retirement, I hope that in these golden years, we will find other academic work on which to enthusiastically collaborate. Big up Hubert, nuff respect Jew for true.
Okay, so thanks, Professor Cooper. We'll take just a couple questions because the day is long spent.
Anyhow, we're back to our 8 o'clock closure.
Yes.
Wow, yes, Professor Cooper, I really love that presentation. And you know, as always, your words continue to inspire me and a number of the other linguists here, definitely. So when I was coming to the campus this morning, I was coming from Portmore with my mother, and I was telling her about the conference so far. And I was telling her that Professor Cooper is speaking tonight. And she said that day one day. So,
that was nice in comparison to some of the things that people say about me.
Trust me, it's mild, based on a lot of the comments I've seen in the newspaper.
Yes.
So I say, where Professor Cooper do you know? And she go on and on, but she couldn't pinpoint a specific idea or thing that you said that pissed her off. Fine? She just said that day one day. And then she kissed her teeth when I started to question her, where Professor Cooper do you? And I've had discussions like this in the past, you know, with other persons, and I tell them that what Professor Cooper has done is not very different from what Louise Bennett was doing, and people love Louise Bennett. And a part of me wonders if maybe if you did a swing your hips in bandana, your skin a little bit lighter, and you had a basket on your head, if people would somehow appreciate the fact that what you're doing is not much different from her.
No, you see, Jamaican is appropriate for entertainment.
Yeah.
It's when you take it out of that domain now and bring it into academia, all the work that Hubert did with the Jamaican language unit. I just had to, I'm writing a response to Daniel Thwaites for Sunday, which I'm calling Daniel Thwaites channeling Morris Cargill, because it's the same foolishness from Morris Cargill that Daniel Thwaites is back with. And, the whole idea, he actually said something about, hacking through Patois Bible, is time that could be spent on something else. And even that metaphor of hacking through suggests that reading in Jamaican is not an intellectual exercise. It's like hard labor. And so, hard manual labor, and so, it's a real issue. But what can you do? What can you do?
Looking back at the sweep of your intercourse academic with the Jamaican language unit and linguistics, is there anything that you would have done differently? What would that be? And tell us about
not
it.
Really.
Any regrets?
No regrets. I feel that I was a good advocate. I had access to the media, and I used to use it to try to popularize a lot of the work that Hubert was doing as a linguist. And, on many occasions he was able to write on his own behalf. But you see, I think to some degree academic discourse tends to be a little inaccessible in the media. And I learned early that you don't have to use big words to talk about important subjects. I'm not throwing words on him. I'm just saying in general, so, and I think I've tried to use the opportunities I've gotten. Now, if you want to go way back to say what I would have done differently, perhaps when I came to university as an undergraduate, if I knew then what I know now, I might have done linguistics instead of literature. But then linguistics is not as sexy as literature. And literature got me into cultural studies, which is very hot, So I'm not so sure that I regret having stayed in literature. In fact, when I came, I was actually accepted to do modern languages. And then when I realized that modern languages was actually studying literature in a foreign language, I said, well, why am I going to be studying literature in a foreign language when I can study it in my own language? There's a part of me that is very lazy, and I decided to go and study literature in English rather than in French and Spanish. So I can't think of anything that I would have no do-over. Maybe it sounds a little too self-satisfied, but I feel I've been very fortunate to have had the kind of trajectory I've had. And my collaborating with Hubert gave me access, to another way of packaging the ideas that I had. Because anytime I send them a draft of the thing, this makes sense, and it would boof me sometimes and say, all right, go on, And even quite recently, I wrote a column in which I described the Cassidy writing system as phonetic, and he immediately said, man, it's not phonetic, it's phonemic, and that is good.
All right, so let's thank Professor Cooper again.
And thank you for being so attentive at this hour. Much appreciated.
I just want to say that reading your articles in Patois earlier in my life, I find that it actually helps now in my career, because you do find that most persons don't like to read and they don't understand the English language, even at the highest level of society. Now, when you level with a customer using Patois, it resonates better with them, and because of you, I understood that early before even going into the working world, and that has helped me tremendously. So I just want to say, continue with the advocacy. It is really appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and with all the talk of intercourse, from time to time when I speak to Prof, I'll talk about, either his son or his daughter, and he'll say to me, for some strange reason, he has all these children, that he never had the pleasure of making. So, okay, so we have one final thing to do, and I'll try to do it quickly. Thanks to a team that includes myself, which is weird. The organizing team made up of Dr. Kadian Walters, Dr. Celia Blake, Susanna Campbell. I'd also like to thank the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Education, Waibinte Wariboko, the head of department for the Department of Language, Linguistics and Philosophy, Ingrid Bakarin, the admin staff of the department, especially Ava Mundel, Yvette Mundi White, and Donik Salmon, the students of Ling 3399 and Ling 3201, who helped out with registration and other organizational matters, MITS, for being very patient with us, for being here, for the 2 full days before us and after us, recording. Peter Watson for setting up the Zoom link. This is the best I've seen it work in all the time. We should pursue it more. Kwame Thomas from the faculty office, who had to do all of the rescheduling of classes which would have taken place in this room. Bernadette McPherson, Simone, also Dr. Karen Carpenter and Professor Caroline Cooper for their plenaries. The persons who chaired panels, Aisha and the Peace Corps group who provided entertainment yesterday, the Preston Entertainment and Cultural Ensemble, maintenance for providing sound for us, and of course to you for being a very gracious, a very patient audience. And the caterers.